Okay, one last time, I would like to welcome everyone and thank you for joining us. This session is Legislative Advocacy 101 for nonprofits. So, welcome everyone. And if you're not already aware, Wisconsin Literacy is a nonprofit statewide coalition that serves over 80 literacy members across the state to help strengthen the power of learning in every community through literacy, professional development, health, digital and workforce literacy programs, and advocacy. We expand opportunities and build a more equitable, literate Wisconsin. So, welcome everyone. We're excited to get started. And a few housekeeping things to mention is we will be recording this session. So, hope you don't mind that. And we will also, at any point, if you have any questions, please go ahead and put them in the chat and we can address them as they come up. And please also keep yourself muted throughout the session to eliminate any background noise. Unless you have a question that you would like to voice instead of put in the chat, then you would be welcome to do that as well. Now, as we begin, we are going to actually start with a mission moment. So this is going to highlight the ways that together with our members, we strengthen literacy statewide. So to start with this first mission moment, I would like to introduce board member representatives Eric Johnson and Anna Krause, as well as Wisconsin Literacy's Associate Director, Ashley Henricks. And they will all be sharing about their work on the board with Wisconsin Literacy.
Good morning, everyone. As Robin mentioned, I'm Ashley Henricks. I'm Associate Director at Wisconsin Literacy, and I wanted to take just a couple minutes to talk a little bit about an opportunity available to our member agencies, and that is serving on the Wisconsin Literacy Board as a member agency representative. And Eric and Anna are going to speak from their experiences as serving in that role. And I just wanted to let everyone know who might not be aware that that is an opportunity. We will be electing new member agency reps in April at our annual meeting with a 2-year term that will start in June of 2026. And to give you just kind of the general overview, the member agency reps do attend all board meetings, and there are 6 a year every other month. We do have 3 virtual and 3 in person. The in-person meetings typically are located at a member agency in the Madison, Green Bay, or Milwaukee areas. And those are determined again based on availability and some other details, but there is a virtual option as well. It's so important to have our member voices heard on this board as part of the board of directors. So it's a unique experience and one that I really think strengthens Wisconsin literacy overall. And grounds us, and our member agency reps always bring a new perspective and new thoughts and ideas and knowledge to the board. So please consider the opportunity. In addition to the board meetings, which are always on Friday mornings, member agency reps also serve on one of the board committees, and that could be either finance, fund development, the IDEA committee, integrating data and ethics into action. And we also launched a health literacy committee. So those are some opportunities as part of this volunteer role. So I will turn it over to Eric and Anna.
Thanks, Ashley. So my name is Eric Johnson, and I work at Milwaukee Public Library in the city of Milwaukee. And I manage our refugee and immigrant services program, which is to provide services for refugees and immigrants, whether it's learning English or providing cultural help and supporting other organizations in what they do. I've been on the board since June of 2022, so I'm in my second term. As a member organization, you can do 2 terms. So I decided to stay on because I really enjoy it. And my term will be up next June. So we are one of 2 current member organization members on the board. And I wanted to join the board because I've always felt like Wisconsin Literacy provides important resources and is an important organization to support people and organizations doing work for adult literacy, refugees, immigrants, and so forth. So when I originally joined a few years ago, it was out of interest to help literacy in other ways than I currently do. So outside of supporting other organizations and doing tutoring and things like that, I had a desire to have maybe a bigger role in what Wisconsin literacy and literacy in Wisconsin in general. So I've been on now over 3 years, and I'm also the chair of as Ashley mentioned, the IDEA committee, which is integrating data, ethics, and action, basically helping to encourage inclusion for people that we work with and staff and faculty. Being on Wisconsin Literacy's board gives me a different perspective than if I was just doing literacy work. And being a member organization, I'm able to bring a different perspective, a literacy perspective to the board and help guide Wisconsin Literacy in what it does. There are many opportunities on the board. Other than being on the board, you can go to different events. You will be on a committee on the board. And there's other ways to promote and encourage literacy outside of what we do day to day. It also helps, being on the board also, I feel, helps strengthen the connection between what we do, Wisconsin Literacy, and the Wisconsin Literacy Board. So I strongly encourage anyone who might have interest to consider applying for the board. And if you have any other questions or want more information, I'd be more than happy to talk with you. And I'll turn it over to Anna.
Thanks, Eric, and Ashley. You both did a really great job. There's not a lot that I can say to elaborate what's already been stated. I have worked with the Baraboo Area Literacy Council for 27 years, and I also work with the Kids Ranch, and both of those organizations are involved in literacy. However, the Kids Ranch serves obviously children. I would start by sharing that our relationship with Wisconsin Literacy has been invaluable, as our organization is an all volunteer organization, and Wisconsin Literacy has made, many resources available to us. And, we're always so grateful. When I was originally asked to join the board, I hesitated because I knew that it was going to involve even more volunteer time. But eventually, I decided that I would do it, and the trade-off was well worth it. It was well worth it to have a seat at the table. There are many different kinds of people who sit around the table, and all of them don't necessarily have the same background that, say, Eric would in the library, or Ashley would being, involved with the organization, or I would as being a volunteer. Some of them might be doctors or lawyers, but for whatever reason, literacy is important to them. And the fact that the member organizations are there representing actually, the work that's being done in the field helps make the board a lot more equitable. So I believe that it's really important for member organizations to participate because they do, as Eric stated, have the opportunity to affect real change. And that's really important. Is there a time commitment? Yes, there is. And like Ashley said, will you be asked to sit on the committee, in addition to the regular board commitments? Yes, you will be. But, in the end, it's really important. And it's not a forever gig. There's a start and an end. And, hopefully you'll have the opportunity to be effective while you're there. And that's really what I have to say. And I'll mirror also that if anyone has any questions, please feel free to reach out to me. I would be happy to share anything about my experience. So thank you very, very much for allowing me to address the group this morning.
Well, thank you both for your comments, and hopefully we provided some helpful information to everyone on the call. I will put my contact info in the chat. Again, reach out if you have questions, have interest. We can definitely get you connected to Anna and Eric as well. So, and again, the new member agency reps will be voted in at the April annual meeting, and terms will start June 2026.
All right. Thank you, Ashley. And thank you again, Eric and Anna, for helping us with our mission moment to kick off this second session of our fall virtual conference. So now we would like to move into the session itself. So this is Legislative Advocacy 101 for nonprofits, and this will be presented by Sarah Inman with the Brown County United Way. So we're very happy to have Sarah here. Let me tell you a little bit about her. She's been employed with Brown County United Way for 21 years, preceded by 12 years working with the Wisconsin State Assembly as a chief of staff, a research assistant, and a legislative aide. Her areas of expertise include government relations, policy analysis, nonprofit advocacy, grassroots organizing, and multi-sector collaboration to achieve systems change. She is a graduate of the University of Wisconsin-Green Bay and United Way Worldwide's Advanced Leadership Program. So Sarah, thank you so much for being with us and welcome.
Well, thanks for having me, Robin. Really appreciate everyone's time this morning. Robin and I have known each other for many years. Before she came to Wisconsin Literacy, many important roles within the Green Bay area. So as she mentioned, I've been with United Way in Brown County for a long time, and I think I've known you, Robin, for most of that time. So time goes by very quickly. Like Robin mentioned, before I worked at United Way, right out of college, starting in the early 90s through the early 2000s, dating myself, I worked in the Wisconsin State Assembly and had many great experiences working for a number of legislators and obviously digging deep into the process. And so I'm really always very pleased to share my experience as it applies now to my role at Brown County United Way and generally in the nonprofit realm. So thank you again for having me. I'm a pretty informal presenter, so I know that the chat is going to be monitored and you can put questions in there. And I think Marcia is going to let me know. I apologize if I got your name wrong, Marcia, I think it is going to bring up your questions as you put them in the chat, but also feel free to speak up vocally. Like Robin mentioned earlier, throughout the presentation, it's pretty content heavy, but I wanted to make sure that your time was well spent. And so I'm sure also that copies of the PowerPoint in a PDF form will be provided afterwards. So without further ado, let's see if my technology works. I'm going to share my screen. And I'm going to go into presentation mode. If anybody's used Canva, there's a free version and a paid version. I love it. And so if you noticed while I was opening my screen, that's where I made my PowerPoint, just in case anyone is curious. All right, so my contact information is on the screen. So as you can see, my email, that's the easiest way to reach me. So feel free to utilize that anytime after the presentation. I'm glad to be a resource to anyone who has questions. So the topics we're going to cover in the presentation, roughly an hour. I'm going to provide an overview of the various methods of advocacy, but there is going to be a particular focus on legislative advocacy because that's why you're all here. I'm going to go through guidelines for 501c3 nonprofits engaging in advocacy, including lobbying, and just general best practices that I've learned over the years for individuals as private citizens or if you're representing your organization. Advocacy definition. Very generally, advocacy is an action or an activity by an individual or group that communicates information about or argues for a cause, supports or opposes an action or policy, or pleads on behalf of others. Why do individuals and organizations advocate? Three primary reasons, in my experience: to champion the work, support your mission, protect your organization, so stewardship; to have an impact, raise awareness, address root causes, and drive impact through your advocacy efforts; and access. So when Anna was talking before, I loved some of the words that she was using in reference to board service, right? But it applies here too as well. Having a seat at the table and having an opportunity to affect real change. That's what this is all about. So these are criteria that Brown County United Way generally follows for engaging in advocacy opportunities and developing advocacy priorities. Just good best practices if you're advocating on behalf of your organization. You want to make sure that your advocacy priority, say it's literacy in this situation, your priority within the issue of literacy, it needs to be aligned with your organization's mission, vision, and values. If you are a 501c3, you must be nonpartisan. Otherwise, your tax exempt status is in jeopardy. That means that you can't take sides, whether Republican, Democrat, everything else in between. You must be nonpartisan in your advocacy actions, whether you're engaging in lobbying or anything else. General advocacy, which is providing information in a more general fashion, and I'll get into that later, or if you're engaging in direct lobbying, whatever you're doing, you must be nonpartisan. Also, in selecting an advocacy priority, you want to be sure that it's feasible. So you want to be able to feasibly influence the issue that you're talking about. You want to have an affected constituency, and you want to be sure that you're mindful of having a measurable positive impact. So broken down, that really means whatever issue you choose and whatever topics within that issue, if it's something, again, that's not aligned with your organization, it's not a good idea. If it's a big issue, such as housing or literacy, you want to break it down, and you want to make sure that you reach out to the individual people who are most affected because they're closest to the solution and they provide lived expertise. That's so important. Lived expertise, by the way, is a term that I picked up at another conference I attended years ago. Lived experience is most commonly used, but I really like to emphasize that anyone with lived experience, regardless of their position in life, their educational background, it doesn't matter. Everyone has expertise and their own perspective to bring. And you want to be finally proactive. You want to be adding value to the effort and playing an important role. So as I mentioned before, there are several forms of advocacy: organizing, finding and aligning peers and allies. So who are your friends, whether in a professional or personal sense, and working together with them to make a difference. Another form of advocacy is educating. So you're gathering and sharing general information. So if you are working with a literacy organization and those, again, with lived expertise and based on your own experience, you want to share information on needs around literacy. That's general information and very important. You want to raise awareness. Who cares and why? Again, bringing your perspective as people and as professionals working in the field every day. You want to help raise awareness, in this case, in a legislative sense, elected officials, state officials. Why is what you're advocating for important? You have an opportunity to engage in policy work and craft solutions with decision makers. And engagement. You're asking for a specific change. This type of advocacy includes lobbying, which I'll get into a deep dive into in a minute. What can 501c3 nonprofits do? So Contrary to popular belief, at least in my experience, there are no legal limitations to engaging in nonpartisan advocacy that is not defined as lobbying. So that realm of providing general information on community needs, the needs of your organization. If you're not asking for a specific policy change comprised of 3 elements, which I'll get into in a little bit, it's unlimited. Within that context, though, you need to be mindful that there are federal, state, and sometimes local laws and regulations on lobbying that you need to be careful to follow if you're engaging in advocacy, specifically lobbying on behalf of your 501c3 organization. So lobbying broken down is comprised, direct lobbying, that is comprised of 3 elements. You can see on the screen, I'm not going to read it all, right? But these 3 elements together is what defines direct lobbying. Directly communicating, orally or in writing, with public officials and or their representatives. That includes elected officials and people who work for government, such as a state agency. Within that context, you're doing that type of communication about a specific legislative action and conveying a for or against position. So within the context of direct lobbying, 501c3 rules apply whether you're engaging with a member of Congress at the federal level, city officials, executive branches, government agencies, but not special bodies such as school and zoning boards. Federal lobbying law is very generous when it comes to 501c3s, and it depends generally on what you're claiming in terms of tax code. So there's an insubstantial part test and a 501h expenditure test. It's most common for nonprofits to file under the insubstantial part test. Again, I'm not going to read the slide, but it generally means that if your organization is a 501c3, you're within federal guidelines if you don't engage in a substantial, quote unquote, amount of lobbying relative to your organization. And substantial isn't really, at least under the insubstantial part test, defined any more specifically than that. So generally, and again, I'm not providing legal advice here, whether it's less than 50% of what you do, that would be insubstantial in my opinion. But again, if you're going to engage in direct lobbying, consult someone who would know and be an expert in IRS code. But that's generally my knowledge and experience. Now, like I said before, that's federal law. Within Wisconsin state law, there's a lot more specificity when it comes to engaging with state officials, and you have to be careful here. You can lobby, but make sure that when you're lobbying, you follow Wisconsin's 5-day limitation threshold. So between January to June and July to December, if you're engaging in direct lobbying with anybody who works for state government, you have to make sure that you're not contacting, as an individual representing your organization, direct lobbying. So on the 4th day, so you call someone up, you schedule a meeting, the meeting occurs, and then there's follow-up. That's 4 times within that 6 months period. If you go over that, then you have to do what's called registering as a lobbying organization. Now, you can do that as a 501c3, but there are a lot of reporting requirements that go along with that, and it's a decision that your organization needs to make. So it's not that you can't lobby, because again, that federal umbrella is pretty general, and as long as you're not engaging in a substantial amount of lobbying as a 501c3, you can do that. But within the state of Wisconsin, there are these additional layers. The Wisconsin Ethics Commission is the place to contact. Again, I'm not presenting myself as an expert on all things, either federal or state lobbying laws and regulations. These are general practices to follow. But before you reach, for instance, that 4th day, You can call the Ethics Commission for free confidential advice. You're not going to get into trouble, but you need to be careful. Now, these limitations only apply to direct lobbying, that three-part test that I talked about before. If you're advocating generally, providing information, to a state official, that's different, and there are no limitations to that. There are general exceptions. So general public communications, such as organizing a letter writing campaign, that's grassroots lobbying. That doesn't fall under the direct lobbying definition. Within certain guidelines, organizations that don't employ a lobbyist can host legislative breakfasts or similar events. Again, call the Ethics Commission first before you host the event, just to make sure you're in compliance. And another one is technical assistance. If you are contacted in writing, for instance, by a legislative committee to provide testimony, that is not counted as lobbying. An important note, generally, whether you're lobbying or not, when you're engaging with state government officials, meaning elected officials, agency heads, agency employees, candidates for public office, you can't buy them lunch, you can't buy them coffee, you can't provide anything of pecuniary value, generally, no matter whether you're engaging in direct lobbying or advocacy generally. It's just not permitted. Volunteers, this is pretty cool. So if you have volunteers engaged with your nonprofit, if they are unpaid and they are engaging in advocacy that is not using your organization's funds or resources, meaning staff time, not counted toward lobbying limits. Any questions so far before I move on to elections?
I don't see any in the chat, but we, by all means, drop your questions there.
This is a lot of information, and like I said, I wanted to make your time worthwhile, and you'll get it after the presentation is over. But I'm talking a lot, but please feel free to interrupt. I have no problem with that. All right, elections. We can, as 501c3s, engage in voter registration, for instance. One thing we absolutely cannot do, because it's obviously partisan, is endorse candidates for public office, whether it's a partisan election or not. For instance, mayoral elections are generally nonpartisan, still can't endorse mayoral candidates. So one thing we can do that's really great is engaging again in nonpartisan voter registration, voter education, get out the vote activities. Be really careful though, do not engage with or coordinate activities with political campaigns, political parties, political action committees. So for instance, if you want to have your nonprofit be the site to help people register to vote, while they're registering to vote and they're asking you questions about candidates, do not respond. You can't. You're only providing a service which is showing anyone who comes to your door how to register to vote and providing related information. So some of the things that I just reviewed: political endorsement, again, no endorsement of candidates for political office. Volunteering at the polls, that's something you can do too. If you're at a table, again, people come in, you hand them their voting number, they go to vote. You can volunteer. Be careful of what your employee handbooks say, right? But generally, if you're either obviously a private citizen or working for a nonprofit and your organization approves, you can be a volunteer poll worker. However, something that's commonly referred to as poll watching, you can't do if you're representing your organization. If you have the day off and you're a private citizen, it's different. We're not going to get into that today, but generally what I'm talking about applies to when you're representing your 501c3 organization. Poll watching is generally performed on behalf of a candidate or political party, so that is definitely partisan. So if you're volunteering at the polls, it can't be in that manner whatsoever. All right. Voter registration, this is important. And some nonprofits around the state have gotten into a little bit of trouble around this just because it's something that's not commonly known. So when you're doing a voter registration drive, you can't offer any incentive of monetary value. So, hey, come and register to vote and we'll give you a meal, or we'll give, people rides to polls, or we're going to have a raffle at our voter registration event. Big no-no. Can't do that. So again, you can, in this instance, register people to vote, but not while offering anything of value or being partisan in any way. So there's lots of ways to do that. You just need to know what the guidelines are. Additional considerations. So you are super excited, you know more now than you did before, and you want to engage in either general advocacy or direct lobbying as a form of advocacy. It's always a really good idea, again, if you're acting on behalf of your organization, to review your organization's bylaws and your employee handbook for any language regarding advocacy, including but not limited to lobbying and elections. And if your organization decides to engage in advocacy, whether it's large, mid-sized, or small, make sure everybody's on the same page with what your priorities are, what your protocols are, who can speak on behalf of the organization and in what context, etc. And grants. If you're receiving government grants and your position, for instance, is specifically funded by a grant, it's a really good idea to review applicable grant materials carefully because most government grants, it's not, you can't use those dollars to engage in advocacy and more specifically lobbying in most instances. Any questions at this point?
None in the chat. I think I guess I have a question. You just mentioned if you had government grants, what kind of language would there be that tells you if you can or can't, participate in some of this?
So any government grant, whether it's a state grant, local grant, federal grant, they'll have materials that they provide to you after you receive the grant. And sometimes, well, a lot of times when you're applying for it, it'll say, right, this grant, you're not eligible to apply, for instance, if the focus is advocacy, right? Or when you, like I just mentioned, when you receive the grant materials, it'll have guidelines within those materials to say, more specifically what the dollars can and cannot be used for.
Great, thank you.
All right. So let's get into some best practices for engaging in advocacy. And this isn't just about direct lobbying, advocacy in general when you're engaging with public officials. You want to do your research. So before you engage with, for instance, an elected official verbally or in writing, you want to look to see what their interests, affiliations, and positions on related issues are. So a lot of times you can do newspaper article searches. You can go to their own personal web pages, provides information on, if applicable, what their profession is or was prior to their being elected. They have often publicly stated positions on things. So I'll give you an example. Say you're going in to talk about, with one of your state legislators, you're going in to talk about childcare and the importance of childcare, and say legislator A received an award from a early childhood association and used to work in a childcare center, right? That'd be very different than going in to see legislator B, who is a person who has publicly stated that children should not be enrolled in childcare and should be raised in the home. Very different positions. You still going to see both people, right? But you're very aware before you go in what that person's personal perspective may be, because your messaging changes and your approach changes. You want to always, and this is obvious, right? Communicate clearly and respectfully. So tell them who you are. If you're a constituent of theirs, if your home is located within their district or your workplace or both, are located within their district. It's an important consideration. And I say this because sometimes you have an opportunity to participate in advocacy days. And I'll use Brown County as an example. You might be visiting several Brown County legislators in the Senate and Assembly. And not all of them are going to be located. You're not going to be constituents of all of them. They want to hear from you regardless, but they're going to be particularly interested, hopefully, if you're a constituent. When you go in, you want to provide a one-page handout, either single or double-sided. I tend to be, and Robin knows this, very detailed as a writer, and so usually mine are double-sided. But you don't want to go over a double-sided handout because you'll lose their interest. Within that handout, and you're all from literacy organizations or literacy affiliates, right? So you get into this just as much as I do. You want to be specific, straightforward, and succinct. You want to provide your rationale in the form of evidence. You can include local data if you have it, who is affected and why. And then you want to tell at least one real life story, that lived expertise that I talked about before. So you're focusing on evidence, head, and heart all at once. And everybody responds differently to different types of information. So by including all three of those elements, hopefully you're holding their interest and speaking to the issue the way in which they'll want to hear about it. You want to always follow up in writing. You want to summarize why you were there and provide any additional information that was requested of you at the time. If you're asked a direct question in the meeting and you don't know the answer, that's okay. Again, make sure you get back to them though. And you want to summarize too any direct asks you may have had of them so that you have that record after your visit. Another important consideration, so like we talked about earlier in my bio, I was a legislative staffer for a long time. And this applies to anybody who works in government who represents the official that you're interested in engaging with. A lot of times you'll meet with staff members instead of, for instance, elected official himself or herself. Treat them the same way. Staff members are gatekeepers. They manage the elected officials or the agency head's schedule. And they can be around a lot longer than elected officials, for instance, can be. There are some staffers who work in the Capitol their entire careers, and they work for various legislators, and you're going to encounter them again, more than likely. So just be aware that they're key advisors. All of the information you convey communicated in the same way in which you would when speaking with the official themselves. Public hearings, I thought I would include in here some tips. So if you ever have the opportunity to testify before a legislative committee or any other official committee of government, this is based on the way in which committee hearings typically work within the state legislature, and it's going to vary at local and federal levels, but generally these are good practices to follow. So when you attend a public hearing, you're going to see people from all walks of life, whether they're officials, lobbyists, advocacy organizations, nonprofits, private citizens, citizen interest groups. So it's a great experience, whether you testify or not, and I'll get into that in a little bit, just to engage with, again, people from all different perspectives and experiences. And you learn a lot just by being there and observing and listening anonymously if you want to, right? Or online, because a lot of things are broadcast through Wisconsin Eye these days and other formats, which I'll get into later. But it's a really important experience to be able to engage in, whether as a private citizen or representing your organization. Just be aware. So, for example, budget hearings. If anybody attended a budget hearing, either in Madison or around the state, if it's a public hearing on major legislation, it's going to be crowded and seating is going to be limited. So get there promptly as soon as you can, and you might not always have a physical seat to sit in. So be aware of that. If it's a prominent public hearing or another public proceeding, it's likely going to be live streamed and archived on Wisconsin Eye. So if you're nervous about that, that's okay. Again, you can watch online. You won't be able to testify online, but you can watch online. But just be aware that you may or may not be being recorded while you're there. Um, so generally, when you go to any public hearing, again, this is based on my experience in the Wisconsin legislature. For instance, if you go to a city council, right, hearing, they may not have this process in place, right, depending on where you are. But for state government, you're going to see hearing slips at or near the entrance that you need to fill out. Unless you're just planning on observing anonymously, right? And that's okay. You don't need to fill out a hearing slip. When you fill out those slips, you'll include your name, your affiliation. So if you're representing your organization, you'll write that down. If you're not, then you write down, your usually your just your address, or your city, village, or town of residence. And then you have an opportunity to record your position on, for instance, the legislation that's being considered that day. So your options usually are to either register in favor, against, or for information on the bill you're interested in, or that means you don't want to talk, right? You just want to formally register your opinion. You can testify in favor, against, or for information on a bill, unless you're attending a hearing where it's invited speakers only. So you can still register your opinion, but you won't be able to testify because the committee has set guidelines on, we're only going to hear from the Secretary of the Department of Children and Families, and we're going to hear from XYZ person from this citizen group, so on and so forth. If you want to speak, you have to fill out a slip or you won't be called on. If you want friends along, you can usually testify as an individual or bring up with you a small group of people. And the committee chairs are going to determine, regardless of when you got there, they're going to determine the order in which people are called to testify. It's up to them. In general, and a lot of this applies to when you meet individually in a legislative office, for instance, you want to be prepared to be brief. So for committees, especially if it's super crowded, they're going to set a time frame anywhere from 2 to 5 minutes. And state budget hearings, it's usually 2 minutes, and they will stop you at 2 minutes. So don't be offended. They need to do that so that the flow of the committee goes smoothly, and so that all the people who are there hopefully have time to testify if they wish to do so. You're going to want to briefly state your name and affiliation. You want to bring written copies of your full testimony. So there'll be a page within the room, usually a messenger that works for the legislature and will take from people, handouts. And then they'll give that to the committee clerk typically. And then your testimony will be shared with the entire committee. You can always email that too, but it's always nice when you go to testify in person to have those things in writing, just as it is when you're meeting in person within an individual office. Be aware that just like when you fill out that hearing slip, your testimony is going to become part of the official public record of committee proceedings, which is a good thing, but be aware of that because, for instance, if someone makes an open records request from the committee clerk about a particular bill, then all of the information that was provided on the bill is going to be given out. And it's also just generally part of the public record if you search for it, under the particular committee. So for major legislation such as the state budget, there's also an option of an online public comment portal. So they did that for the state budget this time around, and I think the biennium before as well. Be aware that when you're testifying, you might get questions. You might not. Again, don't be offended if you don't get questions. But if you get a question, same as when you're meeting individually, if you don't know the answer, that's okay. Just say that you'll follow up with the requested information after the hearing. Much better than, trying to speak more generally or responding more generally to a specific question. Just be honest. It's completely fine. All right. Now I'm going to get into, Robin, you're coming off mute. Do you have a question?
Yeah, thank you. So in your opinion, if somebody wants to testify and they're maybe representing several areas. Maybe they're employed by a literacy organization, they're on a board for another nonprofit that deals with the same issue. Maybe they're involved in community events that deal with that issue. Should they introduce themselves as being involved in all of these areas? And what would be a best practice? I imagine they should probably get an okay from their employer or whoever else they're representing.
Yeah. So in general, I'm going to start with private citizens at first. So if you are taking the day off and you are representing yourself. So I'm Sarah, I live in De Pere, Wisconsin, and this is my own personal opinion as a private citizen. That's you can do whatever you want. You don't need your organization's permission to do that because you're taking the day off officially and you're representing yourself. If you are speaking on behalf of your organization or several different affiliations, like Robin just said, you need to get permission first. You need to have taken the steps to just generally review what your employee handbook says and what your bylaws say. If it's general advocacy, you still need to, take those steps just to be considerate of your employer and making sure that you're following the guidelines that organization expects of you. And it might seem like I'm making a big deal out of this. I'm really not. It's just a good practice. Regardless of where you work, it's always good just to take those steps first and make sure that you're following the guidelines under which you're employed. Did I answer your whole question? I don't know if I remembered all of it.
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Any other thoughts before I move on to resources? All right, thanks for that question, Robin. All right, so here are some resources that you can look into at your leisure. So, of course, there's the IRS code, that's Chapter 501, relative to federal lobbying laws for 501c3 nonprofits that I outlined earlier. I mentioned also the State of Wisconsin Ethics Board. Call them for free advice, confidential advice, any questions that you have relative to Wisconsin's lobbying laws. If you decide that you're going to engage in direct lobbying as a representative of your organization, they can answer any questions that you might have. The information that I've provided is general. I'm not representing myself as an expert on all things, and it's always a good practice relating to direct lobbying in particular, or like I mentioned before, whether you want to host a legislative breakfast or anything like that, just call first. And they're very, very helpful. Elections. So if you are engaging in voter registration or any other nonpartisan activity and you have questions, you can call the Wisconsin Elections Commission, and there's that number there. And all of these organizations and entities are also, online. There are resources as well. But when you're delving into specifics, I found there's no harm in calling, and it's just gives you peace of mind. The Wisconsin Ethics Commission, in particular, maintains, I noticed I mixed up my wording. The Ethics Board, rather, not the Ethics Commission, maintains a searchable web page of state lobbying activities. And so, just for your own research, if you want to find out, and I'll show you how to do that in a little bit, if there's a particular piece of legislation and you want to go talk to a legislator about it, or just for your own general interest, you can look up and see who's been lobbying, either for or against, or just for general information on a bill, meaning registered lobbyists and lobbying organizations. So it's good background information to have, in addition to, again, in the case of when you're communicating with a legislator, knowing his, her, or their individual background. The Wisconsin legislature's homepage is fantastic. Not all state legislatures have web pages that are as resourceful as this one. I'll take you through it in a little bit, but you can find out all kinds of information about state legislators. You can, look in the statutes online. You can look up bills. You can access information that the nonpartisan service agencies provide. You can see the session calendar, all kinds of cool stuff. You can tell I kind of geek out, but it is pretty cool. There's also an organization that I think I mentioned earlier called Wisconsin Eye, and it's a great entity that is present generally at, again, hearings on major legislation, other proceedings of government, kind of Wisconsin's version of C-SPAN. It's a really cool website that I'll take you to in a minute, and you can sign up for a free account and get notifications on things. Um, and also special interest groups, either at local, state, or federal levels that are aligned with your organization's or your own personal, depending on perspective you're coming from, values, um, such as Wisconsin Literacy, right, are great organizations to align with when you're advocating, whether or not it's direct lobbying, right? If it's general advocacy too, just align yourself with friends and work together to make your advocacy effort even more powerful. All right, so there are some online resources, and I think, Robin, when I shared with you the PDF version of my PowerPoint, these links should still be live within that PDF. I hope so. If not, let me know, and I can send out another document where the links are live. So this is, a lot of you probably know this already, right? But there are local, state, and federal entities that maintain useful online resources, and so there's some examples there. So White House, House of Representatives, U.S. Senate, Wisconsin governor, whether it's Governor Evers or any other governor, right, you can usually sign up, for instance, for press releases that are sent out. Or if it's a state assembly person, they usually have these days an online newsletter, and you can sign up for that. You can go into, as per my example on the screen, the city of Green Bay, and you want to know when the Common Council's meeting. You can find that out, and there are agendas usually posted for every hearing that's happening, and some of them are streamed online as well. So the Wisconsin Legislature's webpage, which I talked about just a minute ago, some of the tools, once I get out of my presentation, I'll go directly to that website. There's a Find My Legislators tool, so if you don't know who represents you, you can put in your address and it'll tell you, again, whether it's your personal home address or your work address, so that, like I was saying before, if you go in to meet with an official or you're writing them a letter, you can identify yourself as a constituent or identify your workplace as being located within their district, et cetera. And there's a free notification service, which is pretty cool. If you're interested in a particular bill that's making its way through the legislature, you can sign up for free email notifications, either by bill or by issue, and you'll get emails relative to that. Additional online resources. So you can see a screenshot to the Wisconsin Ethics Commission's lobbying website. I'll take you through that in a minute. Wisconsin Eye, which I mentioned, everybody knows what C-SPAN is. Those are just a few examples of additional online resources that you can go to find out information on pretty much anything you want to know. All right, so I'm going to stop my share for a second because I am going to go into some of my online resources. Before I do that, does anybody have any questions at this point?
Nothing in the chat, but we'd certainly be happy to hear from you. I think you've done such a good job that people get it all. This is great.
Thank you. I hope that's the case. And if you don't have questions, that's okay too. I just always want to make sure I pause to give people an opportunity if they want to. So, all right, I'm going to share my screen again. So this is the Wisconsin Legislature's website. And I'm going to take you through just a couple of things that you can find out as you're exploring the website. So here's the web address, but if you just type in Wisconsin Legislature, it's going to come up in your browser. So you can go to, for instance, the state Senate, and you can find out who all the officers are, right? Senate President, the Majority Leader, the Assistant Majority Leader, etc. You can find out information about individual legislators. So let's see, let's pick one at random. Okay, let's go to this senator from Appleton. Now, you can find out pretty easily, as you can see, proposals that she has authored. And so that is generally going to be bills where she's listed either first or second. Those are the co-authors, and the other folks are the co-sponsors. So you can, here it says first or second author or first sponsor. So really easy way to find out either generally or before you go meet with the senator what she's authored or co-authored. You can look at her district map. Her direct email is there. This is a list of her staff. So generally, when you're calling a legislator's office, sometimes, as in this case, they're going to have more than one staff person. So you always want to, if you're aiming to schedule a meeting, you'll want to ask for the scheduler. If you're aiming to express verbally over the phone an opinion on a particular bill, you want to, when the phone is answered, briefly say, this is the bill I would like to either ask a question about or express an opinion about. Could I talk to the staff person who specializes in that issue? Now, sometimes, for instance, in the state assembly, if you're a freshman legislator in the minority, you're only going to have one staff person. In the Senate, whether you're in the majority or the minority, you're going to have more than one staff person. So in Wisconsin, I don't want to get too much into the weeds. Senate districts are comprised of 3 assembly districts. So for every state senator, there are 3 assembly districts within that. And so that's why senators generally tend to have more staff because they're representing that broader area versus the assembly district, which is a third of their Senate district, each one.
Sarah, there's a great question asking,
Yes.
is there a better time of year to reach out to legislators? And I would add, is there a time of year we should avoid reaching out to legislators?
Sure, that's a really good question.
Yes.
I'm gonna wrap up this webpage super quickly, and then I'm gonna pivot and answer that question. So finishing up on the senator here, you can look and see her current committees, and then there's a brief bio, great info. And then she also, in this case, not everybody does, but she has her own homepage with even more information about what she stands for and the work that she's doing. So great resources, whether you're writing a letter, meeting in person, or, calling. Now, in terms of the question, so let's go to the assembly home, for instance. Let's see. So here is the session schedule. Oops, that's not the one I wanted. I wanted this more colorful one. So best times to contact, in this case, Wisconsin state legislators. So if you're looking to, this is super high level, and then I'll get more down into the thick of things. Generally, the legislators, when they're in session, are going to be in Madison Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Generally. Mondays, Fridays, they tend to be in the district, unless it's, they're working on the state budget and they're going into overtime and they may be, there all week. But generally in regular session, they're there Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, home on Monday, Friday. So the shaded areas here in yellow tell you when the legislature is in session. And so when you're contacting them about a bill, you don't want to wait till super late in the session, for instance. So in this case, session for the Wisconsin legislature is a roughly 2-year cycle. So there's 2025 and 2026, right? 2026 is shorter because guess what? we all know every 2 years so I'm talking about state level in this case. Every 2 years, there's an election. Every 2 years, every single member of the 99 member state assembly is up for election. Every 2 years, a third of the state senate is up for election. And so generally, I think one of the questions was, Marcia, I mean, you can contact a legislator anytime, but be aware if you want to impact legislation either through general advocacy or direct lobbying, make sure you're doing it during session when that bill is still in play, because when session is over, everything resets. So next session, even if there was a bill introduced this session, it's going to have to be reintroduced and it's going to have a different bill number, etc. So if you're hoping to influence legislation or generally talk about an issue that's relevant, make sure you're doing it while they're in session and don't get too close to the end. Because then in this case, in 2026, elections kick in and everyone's out of the building and they're focusing on getting reelected. If, for instance, they're in the state assembly, they're up every 2 years. If you're in the state senate and you're part of the third that's up, they're still always available to talk to you, but generally stay within when they're in session. Was there another part of the question, Marcia, that I didn't get to?
No, I think you actually covered both because one was when's a good time and when should we avoid. So great
Yeah,
answer. Thank you.
yeah. I tend to get down in the weeds because I get so excited. So I'm glad I covered it. All right, so that's the session calendar. And then let's see. Let's take you to looking at my notes here. So let's go to a specific committee webpage. So in this case, I'm going to take you to the Joint Committee on Finance. Now, it's a joint committee because it has both Assembly and Senate members. And then on the Senate and Assembly side, there's another set of committees that are only specific to that House. But Joint Committee on Finance, for instance, and as you'll see in a minute, it has co-chairs, a Senate co-chair, an Assembly co-chair, and then a mixture of members from the Assembly and Senate. So in this particular case, the committee has this great website. You can find information on who the committee clerk is, how to contact him. The reason for contacting a committee clerk, for example, would be to ask a question about, oh, when's the next committee hearing going to be scheduled? They may or may not know, they may or may not be able to tell you, but it's depending on the situation. But committee clerks are super useful. Or if you're interested in finding out, information that was submitted on a particular bill after a hearing, that committee clerk can, provide you with that information. All right, so let's see. Useful information, just committees in general, going to their web pages. Now, if you want to find out information about a particular bill, this is one way to go about it. I'm going through the committee website here, but if you go to the main page, you can also search for a bill by topic or bill number. But because I'm watching the time here, I'm just going to take this shortcut and give you some insider info on when you're viewing a bill draft. So just generally, when a legislator is introducing legislation, if it's going to be successful, you usually want bipartisan sponsorship, right? That's always a good thing. There's one legislator I can go into all kinds of details here. So let's say it's an assembly bill and a representative introduces legislation. They submit that legislation to a nonpartisan service agency called the Legislative Reference Bureau. And the attorneys there draft the bill per the legislator's request. So in this case, this is Assembly Bill 346. Up in this handy dandy right-hand corner, you'll see these LRB numbers. So that's the record of when the legislation was first submitted to LRB. It's given a number, 2393/1 means it's the first draft. Sometimes you'll see in this corner /3/4, that means it's been through 4 drafts before it was actually introduced. Not everybody cares or needs to know that, but I think it's kind of cool that they keep track of that. These hopefully you can see my cursor in the corner where it says EVM SKU. This refers to the initials of the drafting attorney. This is the bill itself. So it's assigned a number once it's drafted and then officially submitted for introduction. And then it goes to either Assembly or Senate Organization Committees, and they assign it to a committee. Or if it's highly political or for some other reason, sometimes bills don't even make it that far. They don't even get assigned to a committee. Otherwise, they get assigned to a committee and they may or may not get a hearing, etc. So Assembly Bill 346, you can see the text of the bill and the analysis by the attorney that drafted it. So it gives a good summary. And then it goes into all the nuts and bolts where in the statutes amendments would happen should the bill pass, those types of things. So that's the bill itself. And then you can also see, like I was just alluding to, so on October 17th, let's go higher. So the bill was enrolled, there was a public hearing, requirement waived. So this was expedited. And passage was recommended by the Committee on Transportation. So usually, let's select another bill here. Usually bills aren't expedited like that. So let's talk about, let's see what happened with this one. Wow, a lot of these are expedited. Anyway, you're getting my point. So you can click on the bill and then it'll take you to the bill history. So the text itself, which I just showed you, if there are any fiscal estimates. So not every bill has a fiscal impact, but some do. So you can see what the fiscal estimates are, any other materials that were submitted, any other information, et cetera, et cetera. So that is a really good way to find out more detailed information about bills that you're interested in. Again, you can sign up for that through. So you can, I mentioned find your legislator here. Here's that legislative notification service. So you can sign up according to issue or bill number or both. And you get free email notifications on what's happening with those pieces of legislation. General information, I mentioned nonpartisan service agencies before. So one of my favorites is Legislative Fiscal Bureau. So these are the folks that work, among other things, so they staff the Joint Committee on Finance. They put together all kinds of publications, nonpartisan publications on, in this, for instance, the state budget bill. All of those things are available to you for free and online. So they do general info papers, informational papers. So if you want to know all about, let's see, I'm not their info papers. Here we go. If you want to know all about corporate income and franchise tax, then you can bring up this free info paper and an expert at the Legislative Fiscal Bureau will have provided all kinds of cool information. So you can see by topic all the info papers that they provide. When it comes to the state budget, there's budget papers, right? All kinds of really important and free and informative information. Anything that you want to know about either the bill as introduced, the executive budget bill as introduced, the amended bill that eventually passes the legislature, any memos on amendments to the budget that were written, you can find all that information here. Let's see, another good one. I mentioned the Reference Bureau earlier. So these are attorneys. Typically, they're attorneys who draft legislation. They also write publications. They do research and analysis. There's an attorney directory. So I mentioned initials of attorneys that have drafted legislation. You can find out by looking in that attorney directory who those initials refer to, etc. All right, watching the time, and I could get buried in the legislature's website forever. I am going to switch gears really quickly. So this is the Eye on Lobbying. So again, if you just Google Eye on Lobbying Wisconsin, it'll bring you up to this site, or you can go to the Ethics Commission's rather website. And just for your own research, you can find out who is registered as a lobbyist, what they're lobbying about. You can search by bill, by topic, etc. Just really interesting information, and it's also a good way to find friends. Those state level, usually organizations who are advocating, if they have a registered lobbyist and they've lobbied on a bill, their information will be here. This is Wisconsin Eye. So this has another really cool, so whether you sign up or not, you can go on this website and watch either live or archived proceedings on, things like the state budget and other things. There's a free service that you can sign up for and receive notifications. Otherwise, you can just hop on the website every once in a while and see if there's anything of interest that you want to view. It's a really cool service. And finally, not related to the state legislature or politics or politicians in general. Sorry, I lost my train of thought there. This is information whether you are advocating on a particular bill or writing a grant or whatever you might be doing. For those who aren't aware, if you search for Wisconsin Alice Report, you will come up to a report or a dashboard rather, where you can find out information much more comprehensive than, for instance, what's provided relative to the federal poverty level on who's struggling to maintain, in this case, household stability due to income and other factors. And so if I had another session, I could take you through this website, but it's pretty easy to navigate. And whether you're advocating or not, it can be super helpful for grants in terms of demonstrating depth of need beyond sometimes antiquated tools to measure what that need might be. So that's my personal plug for the free information through the Wisconsin Alice Report. I am going to stop my share, and I believe in that context, Robin, there were a couple more pieces of information that you wanted to share before we close out. Do you need me to bring up the slides, or can you verbally express that?
Yeah, actually, if you don't mind bringing the slides back up, that might be helpful, because on the last slide, we'll show you that we're trying something new this year. If you were on the session that preceded this one, you'll know that when we close out of this session, you're going to get a screen that pops up. You might need to go to your browser to see it. And this will be it will direct you immediately to our survey. We really do appreciate anytime our members fill out the survey, because that really helps us to know if this was a valuable session or what you're hoping that we could address in a future professional development opportunity. So please watch for this to pop up on your screen after you exit. So thank you again, Sarah. This was really helpful information. We were really glad to hear all of it. And it sounds like this was just scratching the surface. We could probably do another session and go even deeper. So thank you again. And thank you to everyone in the audience for joining us.